Coming to you from the Forge of Freedom studio in the heart of America. A podcast dedicated to preserving freedom and inspiring personal success. Freedom is born and lives through you, the individual, and it dies in the shadows of tyranny. Motivating our listeners to become well-rounded, freedom-minded people with the body of an athlete, the mind of a stoic, and the spirit of a warrior. The tree of liberty lives on through you, the Forge of Freedom. And now here's your host, Alex Ooley.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Forge of Freedom podcast. I'm your host, Alex Ooley, and today I've got a couple special guests that I'm excited to talk to about a subject that I am very passionate about and care deeply about. And I think that it's on the minds of lots of folks, especially after the pandemic. People have started to take more care and attention with respect to their child's education. And that's what we're going to talk about today is education and homeschooling. And I've got Jonathan and Adriana Prescott with me to discuss their book, Kids Don't Need School, a radical new homeschool plan to teach anything, promote independent learning, and prepare children for an uncertain future. And if you're watching the podcast by video, here's the cover of the book. Pre-show, we were talking about the cover and how I think it's that red don't in the title that maybe is somewhat provocative. But that's the cover. If you want to look for it on Amazon, or you can reach you can find the book on their website as well, which I believe is homeschoollife.us. Is that right, Jonathan and Adriana? Okay, excellent. And I'll certainly link to that in the show notes to their website and to the book on Amazon. But first and foremost, I should say, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having us. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, I'm happy to have you, and I'm excited for our discussion. I read this book, and I sort of skimmed through it initially a few months ago and thought, man, I need to get these folks on the show to discuss this book because I think it's very timely. I think there are lots of people with an appetite for this kind of information. As I mentioned during the pandemic, lots of folks were turning to homeschooling because they realized that what their kids were learning in school or what they weren't learning in school was simply atrocious. And this book, I think, gives people the framework to get started and hopefully the confidence to get started with taking control of their child's education. And so I guess, first of all, I'd like to ask, just starting out, could you tell us a little bit about yourselves and what motivated you to write the book?
Adriana, would you like to start?
Yeah, actually, we're Homeschool Life, LLC, and we've been around for a few years, even before the pandemic, and we have homeschooled our daughter for all of her life, basically, from kindergarten, and now she's just started high school level, and she's 14 years old. She already has a company of her own, so she's very much many years ahead of her peers. And so we've been trying to teach, or have been teaching many people about how we have done it with our child, how the successful steps and tools that we've used to basically get our child ahead of the game from everyone else.
Right. And since we're both engineers, we're both electrical engineers, and I'm electrical design engineer, we are used to, and I've been doing it for 30 years, and even spent some time teaching in a local college. But we're used to deconstructing a problem and finding solutions. I mean, that's what we do. And so as engineers, we have a unique perspective on the problems of modern education. And so what we first did is look into the origins of modern education, where it came from. And because if you want to know what the problems is, you have to look at the source of what that is. And so our background comes from an engineering mindset of problem solving and that sort of thing.
Yeah, we bring the data and analytics. That's why our book is not like all the other homeschooling books out there, that it's more of the emotional aspect, trying to get you to feel good about homeschooling. Ours goes into the details of things, really explains it in a deeper level. And I think a lot of people really appreciate that because that's what we bring to the table, the deeper level conversations, the things that we should actually be talking about, thinking about, and questioning. We should be challenging these old ideas. We should be trying to innovate and bring in new things, new ways to do things better.
And we're the first husband-wife team talking about homeschooling. And so that puts another dimension, especially from a man's perspective as well, being a protector of the family. So that's kind of our background. I mean, I've done many other things in my life. I worked overseas. I spent 7 years in Saudi Arabia. I was there during September 11th. Your origin is
South America.
South American. Your family's from Argentina.
Yes.
But you came here
in Brazil. Immigrated to Texas. Did high school and university level education here in the U.S. But I've been in private schools in the past, and it's an international, high-end private school. So I had like the best of the best education, but still, I have my thoughts about that approach. So it's
especially when we discovered about where we had to homeschool our daughter. We discovered that she could read at a very early age, even without us teaching her. She was reading her first words at 10 months old. And so, and it just progressed from there. We looked at different aspects of where would we put her as far as school goes. There's no they can't handle her at public school. They can't, and even private school, that's not going to handle the asynchronous development that our daughter would is part of. So
she did have a little bit of an exposure to Montessori education, which I really, really like. I really recommend it for young children because it really sets them off to be independent learners. And that's really the future for us, is we need to be independent with learning, not having to need someone else to tell us how to do things. We have the technology to be able to learn from other people,
right,
independently.
But as far as finishing up our background,
yes.
Since we saw the Montessori approach, we started researching it.
Yes.
And when we looked at having to homeschool, we looked at the Montessori methodology. And so our methodology that we talk about in the book is very heavy in Montessori philosophy.
Yeah, we went ahead and implemented that with our daughter, and that's what actually set her to pretty much educate herself during her teenage years.
Because Montessori was also an engineer as well as a doctor.
Yeah, she had some engineering experience as well. She was a genius in her time. So
the story behind the Montessori methodology and Dr. Montessori is an interesting story in its own right. And you talk about that a little bit in the book, as well as a few other homeschooling styles or methodologies, which I think are useful for people. But you don't have to be stuck to one type of methodology, and maybe we can get into that in a little bit. But I think in terms of your background and what motivated you to write this book, I think that solving that problem of trying to accommodate your daughter's learning needs and her abilities, that was really the problem you were trying to solve, right? And that's the problem that so many people are trying to solve. Their child doesn't fit into the cookie cutter system that is the public school system. And whether they're a high learning ability or not as fast paced as some others, they don't fit into that model. Is that a fair assessment?
Absolutely.
Exactly. Yeah, the thing is, the scores speak for themselves. That people think that people to go to these education schools that they're actually learning, but they're really not learning. It's more like rotary memorization to pass the test. Kids are not really prepared at the end of high school. Underprepared, I would say.
Right, because up until just a few months before they graduate, they have to ask for permission to go to the bathroom. So there's no agency training. There's no where they're self-sufficient. So we tell kids they're supposed to be responsible, but then we micromanage them, and so that those two forces don't mesh together.
And just for the record, I was a straight A student. I actually did well in that system, but because I played that game, I played it well. I know how to get what I needed to get to win the game, right? So, but that doesn't mean that I appreciated the approach. I thought, to me, thinking back now, I thought, what a waste of my time.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of information and things that I don't really use, I don't really need. And instead of focusing more on the things that I did need that are affecting my life right now.
Yeah.
So it's just not an efficient system at all.
Right. And I think a lot of people can relate to that. I certainly can. And I know a lot of the people in my social circle can relate to that to different degrees. But one thing I'd like to draw out is that you mentioned that your book is different than a lot of homeschool books. And I certainly agree with that. And I think I noticed that difference when I initially skimmed the book, and then even more so when I went through a thorough reading of the book. And I think part of it stems from the fact that you mentioned earlier that you're a husband-wife team that wrote the book, and your emphasis on homeschooling not just being the recreation of school at home. It's
Right.
parenting really is what it is. And it's this emphasis on the family, and that is sort of the essence or the core building block for your child's education. Would you mind to say just a little bit about that?
Absolutely. The thing is education is part of parenting, and when we talk about education, we've been outsourcing education to the state for so long that we don't realize anymore that it is part of parenting.
Yes.
It has been for centuries and millennia that parents taught their children. I mean, even a little bit. You teach your children to walk and to talk and to go to the bathroom, and that's all education.
Yes.
Right. And so that's part of parenting. If the government was suddenly in charge of doing that, we would be led to believe that how could they learn to walk without the state? So really, when we educate our children, right? And here's one of the biggest things. The biggest things for me is when you homeschool, you are now spending 16,000 more hours with your children than you would sending them out to school, either public or private. And so that is relationship building, right? That is legacy building. And
Yes.
so whenever you got something to add?
No, I'm just saying that I'm just agreeing with you that homeschooling is actually parenting. When you have them at home, you're the main ones influencing your children in every aspect.
It is parenting. And it's all about what the family is and how we've lost the idea of family. We've fractured the family, and we've redefined it to the family to be something that is not. We've included all these things to the definition of family over the years and the deconstruction of what the family means. And it is a husband and wife with children. And also the definition of marriage. It's the same idea. And those things, a family and children, are the basis of civilization.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Not the state. Right?
Yeah.
The state is a usurper.
Yeah, the state is the monopoly on the use of force, right? And they use that force to coerce people to comply and be unthinking in lots of ways, right? And to be dependent.
Absolutely.
And homeschooling is a way, and parenting more specifically or more broadly is a way of sort of strengthening that basic family unit so that we don't need government, so that we have families and communities that can be independent, that can thrive on their own through voluntary cooperation, et cetera. And I think that this idea of homeschooling and returning education back to the family helps build on that basic building block of society. Is that?
Exactly.
Yes, because
Yeah.
homeschooling brings the children back to the family.
Right.
You know, it breaks the hold of the degenerate cultures and agendas that poison the minds of the young and impressionable. So when we talk about legacy, we talk about our prodigy and going forth into the future and teaching of values and virtues. You can't establish that legacy and pass on those values and virtues if they're not parental bonded, right? This is one of the things that actually Dr. Gabor Mate talks about the importance of the parental bond over the peer bond.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And so, if anyone wants to read an excellent book on that, they can read what is it? Dr. Gabor Mate, Hold On to Your Kids. So that's an excellent read. Mm-hmm. Very insightful.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
One thing I'd like to have you talk about a little bit is, and this goes to returning education to the family, to the home, and creating that parent-child bond, that relationship. A lot of people think that's weird. That why would you want to have your child at home so much, right? And it sounds. I mean, we laugh because it sounds funny, but that's a typical or common response, and it's really the public compulsory education system that's weird and new. I mean, the compulsory education system hasn't been in existence until modern history, really. Would you mind to say a little bit about the history and sort of the origins of the modern compulsory school system?
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah, it's actually based on the Prussian model, but I'll let Jonathan explain it.
Right. And we can actually, we go into it a little bit in the book, just kind of a background. But the modern Prussian model was the brainchild of Johann Fichte, a philosopher during the Napoleonic times. And they were, when the Prussians lost to Napoleon, one of the things that they noticed is they're not, the peasantry wasn't following orders. They'd conscript the peasantry to pick up a rifle and go to war. If it got too dangerous, they would just throw down their weapons and leave, because they have their families. And so the generals were angry that how come they won't be our cannon fodder? I mean, how dare they? So so they developed a system of compliance, and they called it free education. And ironically, the elites still had their private tutors and stuff like that, but the free education was always for the peasantry, so that they could be good factory workers and never question authority. And they do it by the bells and everything else like this. And everything that you would think that the modern school has exists in some way connected to the Prussian model. In fact, the individuals who brought it over here and adopted it, they're all socialists. You're talking about Dewey and Mann and Kilpatrick. These are the people who brought the Prussian model to here and established
education system.
The education system, the compulsory education system. And so, interestingly enough, Maria Montessori came over to the United States with wonderful reviews.
Yeah.
But the thing is these individuals, I think Kilpatrick really threw her under the bus, and so she left and did her Montessori in India.
Which India benefited a lot through her teachings.
Did. But really, the basis of our modern system is this Fichte, Mann, Dewey, monstrosity
Yeah.
of compliance. And it's just, it's amazing that children learn in spite of this, and so we're saying in our system, when we have our agency intact, the children can learn a lot faster, and in fact they become self-learners by the time they start middle school.
Yeah, they're more self-aware, and they're aware of their surroundings, so they know what they want for themselves, and they know what needs they need to what skills they need to have to be able to survive the current climate of the world they're in.
Right.
So they're more able to easily adjust, as opposed to the students that are in four walls in the schools, where they're protected, but they're not prepared. So if anything happens, like the pandemic, for example, they're completely lost. They don't know how to function in a state of emergency.
And I mentioned agency, and the definition of agency is to the degree to which an individual has the ability to make decisions for their own life. And to have agency means to control, to have control, or the feeling of control over your life and the decisions that you make. Now, that's great and all, but children need to practice agency, and it's a skill to be developed.
I'd like to interrupt you there just briefly, because I want to get back to this point of agency, because I think it's incredibly important. And one thing that you hear a lot of people say is that they're amazed at how little ability that people in public schools have of critical thought. They're not critical thinkers. And I think people see the problem, but they don't understand that it's by design that they are not taught to be critical thinkers. And this goes back to your point about the origins of the modern school system, that they were meant to be followers, that they're meant to be soldiers that followed orders. And I wanted to point out this quote that you included in your book. It's a Bertrand Russell quote that I think is a great quote, and he's summarizing Fichte here. He says, Fichte laid it down that education should aim at destroying free will, so that after pupils are thus schooled, they will be incapable throughout the rest of their lives of thinking or acting otherwise than as their schoolmasters would have wished. And I think that this is a perfect sort of jumping off point for a discussion about agency, because public schools, compulsory schools, government schools do not teach agency. They teach you to follow orders. And we see the atrocities and the horrific result of that with, for instance, the pandemic, where people don't think, they just follow orders. But homeschooling is exactly the opposite. You're trying with homeschooling to give the child agency, to be a free thinking human being that can teach themselves, right? And so that's the huge distinction, I think, and one of the most important distinctions that you draw out in your book. So sorry to interrupt there, but I wanted to sort of make that connection here. And before you start talking about agency, would you mind to sorry to interrupt, but would you mind to continue with your discussion about agency?
See, agency is a skill, like I said, a skill to be developed, but you can't develop it by force. You can't force somebody to have agency, but you have to do it by mentorship, by teaching them, by being an example, a template for behavior and stuff like this. You want to include something?
Yeah, and this is a hard one for parents to wrap their head around, because how do you do this with little children, right? Because it starts as early as little children. How do you give them agency? And so this is why we bring the Montessori method in, because her method actually is about developing agency in children, and it's applicable to young children. Basically, they have freedom of choice of very specific works that have to do with academics or taking care of themselves. It's all guided towards them learning how to take care of themselves at such an early age. And that evolves into even more advanced concepts and other things that they can do for themselves. So there's ways to implement that agency. And of course, later on as teenagers is where now you have conversations about agency.
Right.
So that's the hardest part for parents to understand. How do we implement this with children? Because it's been for so long that we've been telling kids what to do all the time.
Right. And that's the things that is one of the big things in our book that we talk about all throughout the book is the planes of development,
Mm-hmm.
right? What children, where they're at in the different developmental stages.
Mm-hmm.
And that's from Montessori and Jean Piaget, who was a acolyte of the Montessori method. In fact, was headmaster of the Swiss school of Montessori. But he's more well known in the psychology than Montessori, and so there's slightly different things between the two planes of development, but they generally coincide. But parents need to understand and observe what stages their children are in. And we lay out different ages of age ranges so that they can say, okay, well, this is what the child can handle here. You give them agency of little things and the ability to decide. Let's just call it the ability to decide with the younger ages. Give them choices.
Yes.
Let them feel like they have a sense of control and they're not being controlled. And that's really the key. When you start controlling children is when you start getting tantrums, when you start getting defiance, and because the children are like magnets. You try to you push them and they repel, and that's really the biggest thing that people need to understand is, and this is why we teach what we do in the book, is to become an expert in their own children. Not like public teachers. Public teachers, they have to be know a lot of things about managing people, right? And they get a smattering of things about learning styles and stuff like this, but they're not really teaching. The majority of time spent in a classroom is mostly with
managing students.
Managing and logistics and everything else like this, but actual real learning maybe is 5 to 10 minutes for an hour.
Well, and that's the main response, right, to the common criticism of homeschooling is that, well, parents aren't experts at teaching, right? Well,
they don't have to be.
They're not doing the same thing, right? They don't have to be.
They're not doing the same. And not only that, but that's being said, a lot of it because a lot of parents don't have the confidence, because guess what? They're the product of the same public school system. And so it's like an aha moment when they realize, I didn't learn the stuff well enough in the school, and here I'm in the position to teach my kid, and I'm not confident.
Right.
But we say, you know what? This is your second chance to learn alongside your kid. If you didn't do that great in math, but that's the main subject that most parents, really repel is math. Oh my God, math, algebra especially. They say if you didn't learn it well, this is your second chance to learn alongside your child.
And that's a really good bonding experience.
That's a bonding experience, because kids were like, oh my God, I'm learning something that my parent doesn't know, and I'm learning alongside them, and we're going to figure it out together. It's like a group project now. That's fun for kids.
It's really cool whenever the child gets it and the parent does it. And the child now is teaching the parent. Yeah. It's a beautiful thing.
It's a beautiful thing. So you don't always have to be the teacher. You can be their classmate. You can be their friend. And sometimes you're the student. You're going to come to several stages where your child is teaching you things.
Well, I love this discussion because it brings up a myriad of really great points. Number one, I think the parent who doesn't feel confident in teaching their own child is sort of an indictment of the public school system that they went through, number one. Number two, this point about agency, that the parent is not really teaching the child in the sense that we think about with the public school system, where the parent would be lecturing the child, right? They're more or less guiding the child through their own self-learning process,
yes,
right,
and empowering the child to learn on their own. And that gives the child a sense of agency, like we've talked about,
Yes.
but also empowerment and excitement about their own development, right? So that's
Right.
a huge
Exactly.
point. I'd like you to say a little bit about that. But then the other thing is, you mentioned that a lot of times the parent is the student. It's also teaching the child to master the knowledge, the subject, whatever the skill or topic is, because if you can teach it, that means you've truly mastered the topic.
Mhm.
And that's not what happens in the public schools. You regurgitate information and then you forget about it.
And you
Which
get
is
a
why
grade
people-
and a certificate.
Which is
And-
why
and-
that parent doesn't feel confident in teaching their own child, right? So it's kind of comes full circle here.
Yes.
So would you mind to talk a little bit about sort of that self-learning agency and guiding your child's natural abilities?
Yes.
Yeah, let me start real quick. So
Go ahead.
basically is you're encouraging and facilitating, almost like, and this is like in the engineer world, like we do engineering and construction, and you have a project manager. They manage the whole project, whatever is being built, but they're not telling everyone what to do. They're just facilitating. This is the schedule. Can we all meet it? Do we have a problem? Let me know. How can I help you go forward with your piece of this construction and engineering, right? So it's the same thing in your homeschool. You're facilitating and encouraging. You might, especially with young children, you may have to plan and run it by your child and say, hey, we're planning to do this. It's important that you learn these. What do you think? And then they have their input. It's like, okay, well, you inform them the importance of it, and they say, okay, let me try learning that. You make it as appealing and fun, and to where the child can say, okay, this is not so bad. I'll go ahead and try it on my own.
Right.
So you facilitate and encourage all the time. You pay attention to what they're interested in, because those are little opportunities where you can implement something in there that is academically, driven, but it's more towards their interest. Like, it's kind of like appeal to your child so that they can be more receptive to the information.
Right. And here's something interesting is I know that the parents, right, if they're listening to this, they're thinking that they're getting nervous because it's like, I can't make them do this homework.
Yeah.
And first of all, they can deconstruct what they just said. Make them do this work.
Yes.
Okay. You just took away their agency.
Yep.
The question is the child is thinking, why do I need to know this? And we have a little saying that if you cannot answer to their understanding of why you need to know this, then you're not ready to teach it.
Exactly.
And also you have to answer the question for the child: what's in it for me? Right? And that's true for adults.
Yeah.
What's in it for me? And the thing is if we say, well, you're going to get paid. Well, after a while of a certain salary, you're kind of like, this is a little bit, I'm comfortable and everything, but this is not enough money for me.
Yeah. It's
because
not doing it for you, basically.
right. And the people who talk about motivation, especially in the business world, they understand that this idea of external motivation is not a real thing. Okay. The only motivation that really exists, according to Dr. Reese, is in University of Wisconsin, I believe. Anyway, he talks about the 16 basic desires.
Mhm.
And that's a way more, understandable system of motivation than the Skinner models and the behaviorists. Those were a model that is now outdated.
Mm-hmm.
We're not dogs that listen to bells, right? So we have to answer the question, what's in it for me?
Exactly.
Why should I know this?
Yes.
And one of the great ideas is when you're able to say to the child, okay, here's how it applies to your life and how it can benefit you. And you go through that explanation. And if they still don't want to do it, let it go. There's always another time, but you're putting a seed in. The thing is, and the thing that makes parents nervous is, what if my kid gets behind? And then you realize that only like 5 to 10 minutes of classroom hour is spent in actual education and actually transferring of knowledge. You've got plenty of time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You've got plenty of time. You covered one of our clients had a
oh yeah, they this is a sad story. It's a teenage boy, sophomore year in high school, but he started his freshman year during the pandemic. So his first 2 years were a complete failure because they were all this online school and not knowing where to go, what to do. Anyway, they let him down drastically. He was getting Fs across the board, and decided that he had enough, wanted to try homeschooling. Anyway, he was able in 3 months to learn algebra and took a test and got a B. So he went from Fs to B just like that, because he just took it upon himself. He wanted control, actually. Teenage boys want control of their life. They don't want to be told what to do. They're done with that.
And so
I taught him. I basically told him to regain his agency. I told you have the ability to do this, and he wanted to go back to the public school system. So because he wanted to try that again, I don't blame him. He wants to try things, but I told him if they ever let you down again, now you know how to take care of yourself. Now you know how to learn what you need to learn to pass their tests.
I'm interested to know what you think about this. I think parents often fear that their child won't have that internal motivation to learn. But I think they underestimate that agency, that self-empowerment that children can have when they're homeschooled. Because unlike the public school where they're either being taught a subject too quickly or too slowly, they know the material and they're just waiting for everybody else to catch up, or they don't know the material and they're falling behind. That kills their motivation, then they have to be forced to learn it. But when the child is learning at their own pace, is learning things that they are naturally inclined to learn, and they're empowered to learn it, and they're empowered to seek out the knowledge on their own, I think they're hungry for it and can actually learn and master that material much faster than they could in the compulsory setting of a public school.
And every game developer knows that it doesn't matter how complex you make the game. In fact, the more complex, the better. The idea of making things easy sometimes dissuades children from learning. But if you give it enough challenge and it has
to be just the right amount of challenge, because if it's too challenging, they get discouraged.
Right.
They have to have the feeling of winning. They have to win and succeed so that they can be motivated to keep going.
And we also talk about this not in the academic situation, but in just general life. We don't call them chores. We call them skills. And when they need to improve their skills, we tell them, time to level up. It is like, a kid will spend 3 hours on some mundane task in a video game so they can level up to the next one, so they can go, beat the final boss. And they will spend all that time doing, like, killing were-rabbits, and that's, so you have that idea of they are willing to do the work.
Yeah, the thing is, children are naturally motivated, and they have that discovery when they're young. When you have toddlers, they're curious about everything. They want to touch everything. They want to feel everything. They want to help you. They want to be around you. They're already naturally curious. And so you just have to keep maintaining that. Because what happens is once you put them into school and they're forced to do things, that extinguishes that natural curiosity.
Right.
So, but if you keep them at home and you encourage that, they will continue to do that.
Now, of course, this all hinges upon the parent-child relationship and establishing the parent-child bond. Mm-hmm. And generally speaking, don't be an ass to your kids. Don't treat them with disrespect, because you're going to get disrespect back. Be the model of what you want them to be. I remember a number of times driving to work, and I see this father and son, and they go jogging early in the morning, and I'll catch when I drive to work, I catch them, and they're jogging, and it's a father and son, and the only reason he's running is because of a strong parent-child bond of something that the child values in his father, and that's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, children, when you raise them, with respect and in a loving way, they really want to be around you. They follow you everywhere. They want to do things with you. It's like you become their friend, but you're still a parent, obviously mentoring them, but you're not that authority figure that kills their imagination, kills their desires, kills everything. You're somebody who does the opposite.
Right.
Someone who's on their side. And so therefore they're more likely to listen to you. When it comes to those teenage years and young adult years, they start asking you questions. Can you give me advice on things? Can you tell me, I have this idea, what do you think? As opposed to when they're peer bonded, they don't ask their parents anything. They ask their friends.
Right.
Yeah. I think that mutual trust is incredibly powerful. When you trust your child and you cultivate their natural curiosity and you empower them to learn things and to even teach you eventually once they've mastered a topic, I think that's incredibly powerful. And by trusting them to do those things, I think they, in return, trust you back. And I think that's
right.
A very powerful bonding tool and a powerful tool to create that family bond and that parent-child relationship. Yeah.
We also, in the book, we talk about discipline and what it is. And we define discipline as regular practice towards mastery. And this goes back to the mastery thing, where you have familiarity as a first step. You have proficiency, which is, they are proficient in doing something, and we define those in a book. And then, of course, at the end is mastery. And those are the three levels. And so we ditched the idea of grades because it's an irrelevant benchmark. What we focus in on how to recognize if your child has mastered certain things, and then you go on. Now, through the planes of development, they will reach mastery and then have to go back as new information is being integrated. And so there's a new level of
they're always learning and refining
yes.
all the
and
time.
So mastery at the first plane of development is not the same mastery as the second plane, third, and fourth. And so that's really what we focus in on is, again, the planes of development and the idea of regular practice towards mastery. And we also have a quote in there from Gabor Mate is if you want to discipline your kids, make them your disciples, because that's the basis of the word, to make them your disciples, somebody that they want to learn from.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really like that framework. And I think that we were talking about people being worried about their child falling behind, but I think that if you do sort of cultivate that natural curiosity, you work toward mastery and refinement. I think that most children will develop and learn at a much faster pace than their peers in the public schools, and I think that's borne out. You're not even teaching to a particular curriculum necessarily, or to the curriculum that's been adopted by the state, but as a natural byproduct, the child who goes through this process of self-learning and cultivating their curiosity and mastery and refinement will, in fact, do well in those sort of standardized areas. Is that fair?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, like
talk about curriculum.
Curriculum is one of the biggest thing, and it's just information. It's just resources, and there's not just you're not going to find the one book,
right?
The one book that we all must learn from. No, you actually critique them. You find the ones that you think is going to appeal to your child, and even as a parent, you can skim through it and pull the good things about those resources. You don't have to teach by the book exactly the way they tell you. You teach what you think is, your child needs to learn, that would be valuable for them to learn,
and according to your sets of values and virtues.
Yeah.
Because curriculum, that shiny box of turnkey curriculum, even from the best source, is not tailored to your child.
Yeah.
Right? You have to tailor it. Now, it may give you some insight, and it becomes a resource. It becomes a reference point of, okay, yeah, they do need to know this element of language arts, and that kind of helps a little bit. But the information is already out there, and whether you pull a elementary school reader from the 1930s, or whether you use your turnkey curriculum you got from, like, what's his name, the presidential candidate,
the Ron Paul homeschool curriculum.
Ron Paul. Yeah, we were yeah. He has a real good base curriculum, but we don't endorse any curriculum because we want your children to thrive in the system that you provide.
Exactly, whatever that is, and you get to determine that, because a lot of times you get a curriculum and you say, oh, this English is terrible, this world history is terrible, but I like the math. Maybe I can work with the math, but you're going to have to kind of, again, search for the right resources for the subjects that you think your child should learn.
What we dissuade people from is online classroom, because then you don't have a choice.
Yeah.
Then it's cut in stone.
You basically want to throw away the public school system, the old public school system tools that they use. You don't want to use the same tools because you're doing the same thing just at home.
Yeah. And you emphasize this in the book. You said, basically, don't get hung up on the curriculum. You don't have to spend thousands of dollars to recreate. You don't want to spend thousands of dollars to recreate the public school system at home. Find what works for your child, adapt, and you don't have to spend lots of money doing it. In fact, most homeschoolers spend less than $1,000 per year, right? I mean, is that the statistic?
So it's between $600 and $800 is the national average,
right?
That calls into question whether we need school choice vouchers or not. I mean, I was against the vouchers back in the 1990s when Newt Gingrich talked about them, and for the reason that with government money comes government control,
right?
And so it has evolved since then, and now UNESCO, is part of their plan for school vouchers, and it's a way to get the public school system in line with the private school, with homeschoolers, and so they're offering this gilded cage for you to be entrapped into, okay? Because the rules and regulations and stuff are not written, right? Is it for the homeschooler who takes the vouchers or the ESAs? Are they going to have wellness checks? Are they going to have? Is it going to be required curriculum? Now, they may not say, "Oh no, that's definitely not going to happen." They would never do something like that. Well, not yet.
Not yet, exactly.
Okay, it's like
the strings attached come later.
I'm still waiting for the Patriot Act to be repealed.
Yeah, right. Yeah. There's no such thing as a temporary government program, right?
Exactly. And that's the thing. It's a huge government program. And you have to not look at just education as the Department of Education or the teachers' unions. There are thousands of non-governmental agencies, NGOs, and think tanks and nonprofits and things like that involved in education, and they all have their hand in the pie. And remember, during the pandemic, the Department of Education got over $200 billion of COVID relief And right now they're still saying we need to pay teachers more. What'd you do with all the money?
Yeah.
You know,
Daniel Mitchell, I don't know if you know Daniel Mitchell, but he has a blog. He's an economist, and he has these charts, and I'll link to it in the show notes. But every chart, of course, in response to this claim that the education system needs more money, shows the funding for the education system at a steady increase over many years, and the outcomes in terms of education flat or down over that time period. So money is not the problem.
And homeschoolers actually do far better than their publicly schooled peers on standardized tests, SAT, ACT. They do better. In fact, the really exciting thing, okay, we have just, because of the pandemic, which became a homeschooling movement, not a school choice movement, but a homeschooling, we have increased the homeschool population to 5 million homeschoolers. Now, in a complete population of K through 12 in the United States of 50 million, we have 10% of people homeschooling.
That's amazing.
What that's doing is homeschooling is now mainstream, and it's an emerging market. And the things that I'm seeing right now in the homeschooling movement is lots of different people are now becoming providers for the homeschooling families. And that's a good thing. That's the free market. Individual people's, in fact, even universities, I think the University of Arizona is offering a 6 through 12 homeschooling online curriculum. Now, if a college is offering a curriculum for homeschoolers, what does that tell you about the Overton window, about the what they consider mainstream? So it's a beautiful thing that's happening, and if you want to use the word empowerment, fine. We're empowering families because the family is greater than the government. The government is an artificial institution, but family is a real institution.
And that's a great point. And I'd like to emphasize that a little bit, because not only does homeschooling allow the opportunity for the child to have greater academic achievement, but it helps the child grow into an adult that's a self-learner, that's motivated, that's continually curious, that wants to improve, that takes responsibility for their own actions, that has a strong bond with their family. I mean, this is not just about academic achievement, right? These are the kids that are going to grow into adults with families of their own that continue this sort of generational legacy of strong families, strong communities, and just a better, more prosperous world. So it's hard to overstate the power of homeschooling for that reason, not just the academic achievement.
It's a civilizational change, is what it is. And it's a huge political tool. I mean, think about it. If everyone can homeschool, and people, prick up their ears about that. What do you mean everyone can homeschool? I understand population dynamics. Okay, there will be that one person or some groups that actually cannot homeschool, but it doesn't mean that they can't homeschool in the future. The thing is and
it doesn't mean they cannot rely on their community that is established on homeschooling, because we want families to need their community as opposed to needing their government.
Right.
It's completely different. Communities should be taking care of themselves, within the different families.
Right. And really that's the basis of if you want to say, and we're proponents of the extended family, right? The corporate family, which is one step beyond the nuclear family. Nuclear family is very isolationist, but the corporate family of aunts and uncles and grandparents and all that, that's considered the corporate family. That's actually where the power is. Now, beyond that, what you have is the commons, the community, right? Things that we decide as a community to do. And beyond, and that's when we talk about, schools and education and stuff like that, there's some movement for pod schooling and stuff like this, and I get that. But schools will always exist. But I think that homeschooling should become the norm, because it empowers families, and it brings families together and secures each one of the individual families' virtues and values, and preserves them into the next generation. And that's really what we all want, is our legacy to go beyond just ourselves, right? And be absorbed into property taxes, and be absorbed into inheritance tax and all these other things. We want the families to thrive to the next generation and the one after that, and that's just not financial, but it goes into the spiritual and emotional and all the elements of values and virtues of that family. Now, each family is going to be slightly different on what they emphasize in their values and virtues, but that's okay. It's not a centralized killing force of government institutions, and that's the freedom. You can say Second Amendment is great. I'm a great proponent of Second Amendment. But if the people don't have the ability to defend themselves with their family, all we are is then just individuals, and we're powerless.
Exactly. So for us to not have the justification of needing schools or needing the state to oversee us, how we are educated, we need to become experts. We need to become experts in our children and in their education, and basically say, we don't need government to oversee this aspect of our lives anymore.
Yeah, I think that's perfect. And all this, I think, goes to a point that I wanted to make too, is that your book, I think, does a great job telling people how they can homeschool, because that's a lot of times the impediment that people get hung up on is, how can I do this? But I think you emphasize, even more importantly, the why behind it. And I think if people know the why, you can figure out the how. And so often people say, I can't afford it, I can't do this. But I think if you know the why, you think, how can I afford not to do this? And that's, I think, these other points, the academic achievement is a byproduct of these other things. I think that are even more important: the family, the empowerment of the individual. And as you said, Jonathan, the Second Amendment, I'm obviously an advocate of the Second Amendment, but that's considered the palladium of liberty, right? It's there to protect something else, something that's of higher value, and that's the individual, and that's the family. And I think homeschooling does as much or more than anything to create a cohesive family bond and preserve that cohesiveness for generations to come. So,
if you want to know what the things we should be focusing on as far as what to preserve, look at what they attack. Right? They even from the onset of the Marxist movements, they've always attacked the family.
Yeah,
because they're afraid of the family. The family is actually the force that they can't win against. When it's together, and when they and not fractured, and it's well defined and it's strong, then there's nothing that can stand against the family.
The family is the single greatest threat to the existence and proliferation of the government.
Yes.
And so that's what they attack the most. And the public school system is a component of that, for sure. So one thing we're coming up on close to an hour here, so I don't want to drag this out for too long. But you talk a lot about technology in the book. So I'd encourage people to read that section. I think it's important to think about and really contemplate how early you want to introduce technology to your child. I think you do a great job of talking about that in the book. But I think maybe to close, would you mind to talk a little bit about socialization? Because that's one of the most common objections to homeschooling.
Oh, yes. We go over in the book as well. And one of the things that people don't realize is there's two types of socialization. There's primary socialization and secondary socialization. And primary socialization is what you get from your family, about virtues and values and things like that. Secondary socialization is a socialization to a system. Now, if anyone studying business psychology understands that that socialization to a system is like you would have in a corporation, whereas this is the way we do things. Okay, there's no morals or values in there per se. They're just, these are our rules. All right, this is how we do things procedurally. This is how you're supposed to dress. This is how you're supposed to act. Things like that. You're supposed to clock in here. You're supposed to swipe your card there. Those is a socialization to a particular system. Even in the safety engineering, you have a safety culture and a safety system, and there's a socialization to that system. So in a school system is a socialization to a system. Now, what people hear when they talk about socialization is they don't think about that aspect of it. But that's really what the public school system is preaching. Is this is how your kid is supposed to comply to. What they typically think of is football, prom, friends, these type of things, as if friends don't exist outside of school. So it's a very interesting conversation I have with parents, and they say, well, what about prom? I say, okay, let's disambiguate that. What about prom is important? What about going to football is important? Did you know that our community has its own sports teams that are unaffiliated with the school? Did you know that our local homeschooling group has music, and instruments, and a fencing club, and all these other things? They're there. They exist. They just have to look for it. Don't outsource your parenting and to the state. You don't have to. But really, the biggest thing on the socialization is to understand those two systems. Your primary socialization is the most important because that tells you about morals. It talks about in reality what you're supposed to be as a person.
It also defines your identity.
Yes.
It tells you who you are, where you need to be. I mean, that we're having so many identity issues with the kids in the public school system that it's terrible.
Yeah. Well, and people talk all the time, and you hear about this in the gun world as well, about the mental health crisis.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I think that it stems from this identity problem. And to a large degree, there are other, it's a complicated issue, but I think that's a big component of it. And, there are kids that haven't been self-empowered and
put those kids that are it's a socialization to a system, but also micromanage them. Always tell them what to do. Never listen to them. Just say obey. What's going to happen? And how long can somebody endure like that? And then the kid goes home, and the parents just like that. They're a micromanager too. And so don't do this, do this. And they're not given agency their entire life, whether it's home or school. And what happens to them? Okay. Some kids, the only thing that they can control is their food intake, and they start gaining weight. Some of them, the only thing they can control is some sort of addiction. Of video games or smoking or drinking or whatever like this. But whatever they can control, that's what they're going to gravitate towards. Now, if you give them agency and you give them a sense of control over their own lives on a productive and a good thing, then that's what they'll gravitate towards.
Yes, they actually need the practice to make good decisions.
Yes.
Because they never get the practice. Guess what? They're going to make bad decisions.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
Go ahead.
People who lack agency, who lack identity, who lack purpose, they develop mental health problems, depression, they resort to drugs and addiction,
Absolutely.
and it's a cascading problem.
Actually, a lot of adults today have, I'm surprised how many adults today have anxiety issues. That was never a thing, when I was growing up, and now almost every adult says they have anxiety issues.
Yeah, indeed. And I think you do I wanted to touch on socialization a little bit, and I thank you for doing that. But
Sure.
I think you do a great job addressing that issue in the book as well. I think it's an issue that probably one of the most common, if not the most common issue that comes up in a discussion about homeschooling. And I think you do a wonderful job addressing that. And my experience has been that homeschool kids are better adjusted, more socially adept than kids that have been trapped in the public school system, because they know how to interact in the real world, not in this artificial government school system where you're segregated by age and you're forced to comply and you're sitting at a desk and you're taught to listen and stay quiet. That's not real. That's all artificial.
Right.
And what kind of socialization is that really? I think it's bad it's socialization, but it's bad socialization.
It's terrible.
Exactly. Yeah. It's and the thing is they'll redefine what they consider as good. And Christina Hoff Sommers, in her book The War on Boys, goes into how the attitudes towards boys has changed dramatically, and they're not. It's a type of socialization that favors girls.
Yes.
Right, because girls will typically just follow instructions, follow the rules, because there's an element of moral development that where there's different stages, and a lot of times people consider the highest form of morality to be the rules are the rules. We obey the rules, and that's what defines good. Well, what if the rules are laws? Are bad.
Yes.
Okay. What happens to your philosophy then? Mm-hmm. There has to be a higher level of morality beyond the rules are the rules.
I just visited a concentration camp a couple weeks ago, and that's one of the prime examples of just following orders, following the rules. One of the greatest atrocities that's ever been committed by mankind is a result of that sort of mentality.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. I was going to add something, but it escaped my mind here. Go ahead.
Well, one last point, and we'll close up here.
Sure.
This is an issue, and I think I smiled. And if anybody was watching me read your book, they would have seen me smile when I was reading this portion of it. You talk about how public schools are supported by property taxes.
Yes.
And so we've talked about all these other things that I think are far more important. But I also think that property taxes happen to be one of the most evil and insidious forms of tax, because it puts a perpetual lien on property.
Right.
And I think if more people seceded from the public school system, people would start to wonder why all of our money is being taken for the purpose of this, to prop up this public school system. Exactly. And we could be in a position where we might be able to eliminate one of the worst forms of taxation ever.
Yeah. And that's what we talked about at the begin. We started talking about at the beginning of the pandemic is mass homeschooling puts in place a path towards abolishing property tax. Mm-hmm. And most people are like, what are you talking about? Of course we have property tax.
How do we build our roads?
How do we build our roads? I said, well, that's not a property tax. That's municipal, the sales tax. But let's put that aside for a minute. What I want you to own is your home. Yeah. I want you to own your home fully and to be transferred without taxation to your children. Oh my God, that would be terrible. But the thing is once.
Yeah, let me add something real quick. A lot of homeschoolers says, they say it's hard to have one parent at home because of finances and things like that. But imagine if we didn't have to pay those taxes, we would have that money in our pocket, right?
Yeah. And how can anybody be truly free if they don't own a piece of property to sustain their own life? And
Right.
you never do if you pay a perpetual tax on that property.
It's always there. It's a perpetual lien on your home.
Yeah.
And mass homeschooling has the potential to break that yoke.
Mhm.
And because the thing is their entire system of headcount is the basis of their budgets.
Right.
Okay. And all over the country, I think this was in 2021 when the enrollment started dropping dramatically in public school system. You'd see news reports about them trying to scramble to justify their budgets. It's like, we're going to have to make a budget cut, blah blah blah. And so that really is understandable how homeschooling can start that happening.
Yes.
And now, even the governor of Texas, Greg Abbott, has talked and introduced conversation about abolishing the property tax.
Yeah.
And so it's not far-fetched.
Yeah.
Again, it's under the realm of conversation, political conversation.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Sure.
And I keep wanting to say Johari window, but it's not that.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's really the one of the keys and one of our long-term goals. It's not going to happen overnight, but the more and more people, I mean, we've got 10%.
Yeah.
That's a huge political power. 10% of the population is now homeschooling.
Yeah.
What is it going to be at 20%?
Yes. So basically, we families need to step up our game and actually take more ownership of our children, basically.
Yeah. And I think that homeschooling, and we've said this in various ways throughout the conversation, but I think it empowers the family. But what was this country founded on, right? Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, which was a derivation from John Locke, life, liberty, property, which follows our discussion about property tax. But homeschooling is powerful not only for that academic achievement component, but in a higher societal, generational change. Homeschool helps create the environment to accomplish that. And I hope that people will check out your book, Kids Don't Need School, and I'll link to that, like I said, in the show notes. But as we close here, we've talked about quite a bit in the book, but there's so much more in here and so much great information, and you put it together in such I think a wonderful fashion. It's well organized. I love the foreword too by Elijah Stanfield, by the way, too, from the Tuttle twins, and his story is an amazing story. So I hope people will not skip the foreword when they read your book.
Yeah, we appreciate Elijah. He's a friend of mine, and had coffee together a bunch of times. Yeah. So he's a good guy, and
he really loved their book too.
Yes.
Aside from the book, are there any other resources you'd like me to point our listeners to? Your website.
We did mention the website, and
we're gonna have an audiobook ready soon.
Audiobooks coming up within the next 10 days. It'll be available on Amazon along with the hardcover and the Kindle version, and of course the soft cover. We've already sold in overseas in India and Australia and Germany and France and England. We've getting a lot of responses back from those areas.
So we've been promoting our book mainly because it's a lot to process. It's just so much that people have to really think about and ponder and contemplate to say this is our future. What are we going to do today, right, to make it happen? But we're also, apart from that, we are working on some courses as well, because a lot of parents have a hard time deprogramming their minds from the old Prussian ways of the public school system, because a lot of us still went through it. So it's hard to switch it off.
Our membership site is coming on our website, so you can become a member and start taking courses, and there'll be a lot of resources there for you. And it's building. There's going to be more and more, and we've got some plans in the works for a lot of different things.
Yes. And the whole mission is to make parents the experts. We don't want the teachers or the state to say they know better about your children. It's you, the parent, needs to be the expert.
Right. Yeah. We're getting requests for a Spanish version of Kids Don't Need School, and also Danish version, amazingly enough.
And Portuguese.
Cool. We're also, since it's for like kind of the U.S. market, a U.S. Canada market, as far as it's a lot of the research. We're thinking about an international version.
Yeah, with different data and analytics that corresponds more to where they stand. And with the rest of the world, basically.
Yeah. Well, I think that would be interesting because I know several places in Europe where homeschooling is prohibited.
Yes.
So I think a book tailored to that audience might be very beneficial. But I hope that millions more people read your book because, like I said earlier, so many people question how they can afford to homeschool. But I think if they read your book, they'll think, how can I afford not to? And it's a book that I think can motivate generational change and a better world. So thank you so much for writing the book, number one, and also for joining the show. I'll link to your website, homeschoollife.us, as well as your Twitter page, because you're active on X. I called it Twitter again, but you're active on X.
we have over 11,000 followers right now, and it's just going even further.
Yeah. Well, Jonathan and Adriana Prescott, thank you for joining the show. And like I said, I wish you best of luck in promoting this book and promoting the community around it.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yes, thank you.
Take care.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Forge of Freedom. Be sure to subscribe wherever you heard this podcast so you never miss a future episode. For more information or to connect with Alex, you can go to forgeoffreedom.com or follow him on Twitter @ForgeOfFreedom. Until next time, remember, you are the Forge of Freedom.